Hello, welcome back to this bonus episode of this video series, The Parasite Journey of the Horse. So, my name is Martin Nielsen, and I sit here in my research lab at the University of Kentucky, and I am thrilled to talk about this next parasite. So, upon multiple requests, at least two people have asked me if I could talk about pinworms of horses. And so let's do that. I'm very happy to do so. So pinworms is also in Latin called Oxyurus equi, and it is related to the pinworm that people can get, but it is a different species, and you do not get pinworms from horses. Also, pinworms do not cross over from people to horses. So why is this parasite important to talk about? Well, I want to say for the record that on these groups on Facebook where you can ask a veterinarian about things, I want to say that the number one parasite we get questions about is pinworm. It's the typical question where somebody looked through their poop, their horse's poop, of course, and found some worms. They took a picture and they posted it on one of those groups. You can look at just a few different screenshots here where people have found pinworms. They're not really sure what it is. They're asking, is it a large strongyle? Could it be a roundworm? What on earth is going on? I just dewormed 3 weeks ago. Why are these coming out now? So that alone, I think, is enough justification for us to actually talk about this worm. It seems to be one that some people are not really aware of, but a lot of people see it. And why do you see it? Well, it's pretty large. Here's a collection of some adult female pinworms that are collected from the feces of a horse, where they came out, and they're white. You see them very clearly. I've tried putting them in this petri dish. I don't know if you can see, but I'm going to pull up a picture in a little bit, so you can get an idea of what they look like. Here's that picture of that same petri dish. So these can be 3 to 5 centimeters long, so that's 1 to 2 inches long, and so they stand out. They're white, and they have this sort of pin shape. So you have that needle shape with the tapered tail at one end. That's one way to tell them from some of these other worms that you guys are asking about. And so so that's what they look like. Now, what we look at here, and I'll get back to this, these are only the females. We actually rarely ever see the boys for some reason. So the female worms are the ones that we see. And so what about the life cycle of this parasite? And I think, listen in here, because there's a couple important points to this life cycle. First of all, the infective stage is the egg that then embryonates in the environment. Horse somehow ingests these embryonated and infective eggs, and then the eggs will hatch inside of the intestine. Out come the larvae. There are descriptions in ancient literature from the 1930s that these larvae actually migrate and invade the mucosal wall of the large intestine. Now, apparently that's a very transient phenomenon, because when we look in samples from the mucosal wall, we never really find these larvae. So it must be something that's very brief, if it happens at all. And then they make it out into the lumen of the large intestine, and that's where they hang out for the entirety of their life. And I emphasize this: the large intestine, dorsal colon. We are far, far away from the rectum. And there's a point I want to make here. So males and females hang out there, they mate, and then when we look and we collect all of these worms, we rarely find any males at all. It's like, I don't know what's going on with the relationship with these worms between males and females, but the boys are just never around whenever you seem to be needing them. They kind of do their thing and then they disappear. Who's heard about that before? And then the girls have to do all the hard work. And that includes taking this long, strenuous journey from the dorsal colon and all the way down through the rectum to the anus, where they then deliver their eggs out to the environment and die. So this is a suicide mission. So, like I said, a little bit of a skewed balance between who takes which chores in those relationships. So let's take a look at a female worm that it's coming out and she's about to deliver her eggs. Hey, hey, wrong side, wrong side. Hello. Are you suggesting that this is looking better than me? Well, yeah, there might be a point there, but what about if I promise that this will be the last video? Will you please move this? Thank you. And let's get it up on the other side of the screen. There we go. So what's happening here is the female is protruding her rear end outside of the anus, and she's delivering this big, gooey, yellow substance, and it's a big volume when you consider the size of the worm. And that's eggs that are embedded in this sticky, proteinaceous mass that sticks to the skin around the anus. Then she will die and she will come out. So some of those worms that you actually see in the poop of your horse are some of these females that have just delivered their eggs. And then what happens is that this yellow substance mass here is drying, becomes flaky and irritating and itchy. And then you see these horses that are having the itchy bum, they're rubbing their rear ends against objects. We call it the tail rubbing. That's the most common, or actually really the only manifestation of this parasite. And so one thing I need to also emphasize is how you diagnose this parasite. Because the eggs are delivered to this location outside of the intestinal tract, we cannot use fecal egg counts for determining the presence of this parasite. We can detect the eggs, but we have to take either a scrape with a tongue depressor or something like that and look at that under the microscope, or a Scotch tape impression test where you take some tape and you stick it up against the skin, and then you put it on a slide and you look at it under the microscope, and then you can see eggs that look like this. These eggs are very characteristic. They really look like no other parasite egg that you can find from a horse. And so once you see these eggs, you know that you have pinworms. And so that's a little bit about the diagnosis. How common are these parasites? Well, based on these Facebook posts where people ask questions, what worm is this? These are very common. And I want to say that every horse will encounter and also harbor this parasite at least one point in its life. We do not see a declining trend with age, so there appears to be very little or limited immune response to this parasite. So an adult horse is just as likely to having the parasite as a younger horse is. We don't see it in the youngest foals, but once you get to weaning age and beyond, that's actually where we can start seeing these eggs around the anus of these foals even. So foals, weanlings, and yearlings, we do see it there too. And so extremely common parasite. And what about disease? So if you're still watching, you're probably watching because you've had a horse, or you have a horse right now that's struggling with this parasite. It's interesting because the parasite is actually really harmless in itself. It doesn't cause any discomfort in the intestinal tract, doesn't cause any diarrhea, any colic, or anything like that, but it causes that itchy bum. And in some horses, a lot of horses have pinworms, and you don't even notice that they have it. But then a few horses will have that itchy bum, and then in a small subset of those horses, it can seem to sort of go crazy. These horses keep itching, and you keep deworming with all kinds of stuff, and nothing seems to work, and the worms keep coming back. And many of you have actually observed the worms. You have observed these egg packets that I talked about before. I mean, so you know that these are caused by pinworms. However, I do want to emphasize that there are other causes of itchy bum, tail rubbing in horses besides the pinworm. So just because you have a horse that's itching its bum up against objects does not mean that it necessarily has pinworms. There are fungal infections, bacterial infections, allergic conditions that can all cause similar symptoms. So please work with your vet to rule those out before you blame it all on the worms. But like I said, this can happen, and horse owners try all kinds of things. They try to clean the environment, they wash the rear end of their horses as often as they can, and they try to administer relevant dewormers. And let's get to that. So what can we actually treat with? So again, this is tricky, but first of all, there is drug resistance reported to ivermectin on several different continents, and we can see a list of the reports here. And I just mentioned the different continents because once you start seeing any phenomenon on several different continents, it's probably a worldwide phenomenon. Now, ivermectin is one of the macrocyclic lactones. We also have moxidectin in all countries, and even in some countries we have some additional ones. We don't know how they work, these other macrocyclic lactones, but the rule of thumb is if one member of a drug class is failing, then the others are likely to do so as well, because the reason why they're in the same drug class is because they have the same mode of action. So do not count on any macrocyclic lactone, ivermectin, moxidectin, etc., to be working against pinworms. So that leaves the other two drug classes up there, and both of those should be working. However, I know right now some of you are probably sitting there objecting and going, I tried them, and it doesn't work in my horse. We don't have any reports of resistance to these two drug classes. That's how I should put it. Does not mean that there could be resistance developing. I would not rule it out. And if that's happening, of course, that's very concerning. Of the two drug classes, we recommend the benzimidazoles before we recommend Parentel as the second option, and then third option would be the macrocyclic lactones if there's any evidence that they might still work. And this is just based on historic information about which drug class worked the best from the beginning, and that was the benzimidazole. So we have fenbendazole, oxybendazole, and other members of that drug class. Combination deworming is something that some people have tried. We don't know how much extra benefit that's adding, but treating with more than one dewormer at the time is something that some people have been trying, but it's very experimental. But some people are just looking for something that works. The 5-day double dose of fenbendazole, the so-called power pack, is something that people have tried. We really don't have any evidence that that's offering any advantages over the single dose. I can't say it's bad, but I also can't say that it's necessarily any good to do that. So we have these different drug classes, and we got to try and be systematic with them and then use them as wisely as we can. I do want to emphasize one thing, and this is common in some countries for reasons that I don't really understand, but there's no point in administering the dewormer into the rectum, to the rear end. And I know some of you may be laughing out there, but I'm actually not joking. This is something that's been recommended. It's a misunderstanding because the worms do not hang out in the rectum. They're way far up the intestinal tract there, and too far for any tube to ever reach them from that rear end. And so, they don't take residence in the rectum. I did say the female worms are migrating through when they're on that suicide mission, but it's very transient, and you don't see them spend any time in the rectum. So there's no point to delivering any dewormer there. It has to be delivered and administered orally. So please do that, and please just don't do the rectal lavage. It's not helping anything. So I think that leaves us from this, with this video, and we covered all the topics. And so what do we want to learn about the pinworms? Well, the pinworm is the worm with that very strange relationship between the boys and the girls. The boys are never to be found when you need them. The girls do all the hard work They take that long, strenuous journey and they commit suicide in the end. How fair is that? So with that, I hope you enjoyed this video series and found it somewhat edutaining, if you will. And please stick to following this channel or Facebook page and look for future posts. With that, I appreciate your attention and thank you.